Could you share a memorable failure or a setback in your L&D journey, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, was a tricky one for me to think of whilst preparing. I guess implementing English learning in a big company was one of the hardest tasks that I think never succeeded properly, because your success as a learner depends so much on your internal motivation that whatever the company does, it will never be effective unless you really find time and resources for your learning. And during the past 14 years and more, in a big international company where I used to work, I worked on this task both within a local market and on a global level. And I believe it never succeeded that much. At that times, we didn't have as many online resources as now exist. For example, we have Preply now, English Dom, and other digital resources. But before COVID times, everybody wanted to learn face-to-face in a group setting, or to have some tasks and a tutor personally. And again, it's quite a difficult task to find the perfect match. So in terms of the outcomes, I wouldn't say they were too successful, but in terms of my learning journey, I think it was a very important insight that the learner's success depends first of all on his or her own internal motivation. And in some cases, there is nothing the company can do to facilitate that. You invest a lot of resources on a company level, but they won't give you a good return on investment.
Early in my career, I worked in Mozambique for 5 years, and I was working for a company that was Portuguese, and I was a trainer, and they sent me a PowerPoint already made for me to use in a training session. And I read it. It seemed fine to me. And I went to the training session, and I learned the importance of personalization to the audience, because although Mozambique and Portugal both speak Portuguese, there are words that mean different things in these countries. So it was very awful to understand that in the middle of the training session. But I learned that always need to adjust to the audience and to the country or culture. So it was a very good learning experience.
There is one in particular where I couldn't agree on the outline of the session with the trainer, and we were just about to deliver, and in the end we didn't agree, and I went on the stage and I completely made up, in the sense that I created a session on the spot, which wasn't very nice. It wasn't very good, but I didn't felt like I had the support. And I felt, oh, I'm alone, I have to do something, fight or flight response. I just made up the session on the spot. Somehow people say they liked it and it worked, but I don't think that the objective were reached. I didn't, let's say, I learned how to deal with co-trainer better later on, even though I couldn't save that instance right there. Some failures are just failures, and we use them to kickstart a learning process. And I think this one was a session that should have been better. It wasn't. But from this one, I thought, okay, next time I have to do better. What went wrong? What could have I changed? Because in the end, you're in control of yourself only. And how can I have accommodated more choices from the other trainer? How could have I been better about it?
Okay, sorry, I couldn't think of exactly one. All projects have their own challenges, and some of them even get shelved midway through. So for me, what is important is to never fall in love with your projects. Don't get too attached, so it's easier for you to let go when things are not going your way, the way you envisioned it, and so you could start over quick.
It wasn't a kind of setback, but it's a situation that helped me to learn something. It was when I was doing too much webinars, and everything failed us, from the internet to cell phone data to everything. And I believe everyone had that. And my expert was absent for about 10 minutes, and I needed to fill out this space. And that helped me to learn 2 things, actually. First one is prepare for anything. Basically, you cannot be too prepared. Learn your topics, learn your questions, get a bunch of double plans. Always be prepared. That's the first thing. And the second thing, you cannot be scared, and you cannot be not ready for something. To be honest, the most horrible thing that can happen, it might happen. And if it happens to you, you can accept the challenge anyway. So trust in yourself and always be prepared.
Yeah, so when I was first starting out, early in my career, I was building my very first e-learning course. I was all excited. and had all these big ideas, and I was building it on a pretty boring topic. It was about water pH in a power plant, so really dry, boring stuff. And I thought, gosh, I've got to do something to sort of quote unquote spice it up to make it interesting. Just because that was my intuition, I didn't have really any basis for that. And so as I continued, not long after that in my career, I was getting a master's degree in educational technology. And another great book, E-Learning and the Science of Instruction, was part of that program. And I learned that sort of this distracting and so that extra spicing up stuff actually doesn't help learning. It actually suppresses learning and makes the learning worse. And so, sort of my big revelation for that was, we have to sort of always stay curious, kind of validate our intuitions, sound and backed by research and, effective techniques and stuff or not. And so, I look back on that, I think, I shouldn't have done that. But, in the long run, it sort of reminds me, just because you think it's one thing, it's always valuable to go back and check to make sure that's really true.
I was gonna say I have so many stories. I'll say one of my favorite, when we were first building Cognitive Tutor, which is the technology that we now use in Mathia. God, this was like 25 years ago. One of the primary investigators was Al Corbett at Carnegie Mellon. So this was before we started the company. And, we had started field testing, and it came back and said what we considered the classic line, which was neither the software nor the students performed as expected. And that basically has been our experience throughout. And I think actually that's in some ways a big part of our success is that you have to, like, I feel like one of the most important things you learn in graduate school is how little you know, and how things don't always work out the way you expect, and you have to be open to that. And so the idea that you go into a field test or an experiment without the expectation that it's going to turn out positively all the time, you need to expect that and respond to that. And at Carnegie Learning, we embody this into we actually give out an award at our quarterly meeting every quarter called the First Pancake Award. And this also, I think, came from graduate school. I'm not sure who made it up, but the idea is that the first time you make a pancake, it's never right. The pan's too hot or too cold, and it doesn't quite work out. But you learn from you learn what the temperature is, and so the second and third ones are better, right? So we try and reward people for taking risks and taking chances, even if it doesn't work out.
So actually, this was a couple of years back. I was doing like an internship at my university. And one of the challenges that we had at the time was just decreasing retention rates in STEM programs. And so we were tasked with, finding a solution to solve this, myself and other interns. A side story here is prior to that, I was a math tutor. And I remember one day I was teaching a student in a math learning center. And then I asked the question, if 2x equals 360, what's x? And he was a little hesitant to answer the question. But I just felt like for some reason he knew it, right? So I asked him, I saw he was wearing Jordans. And so I reframed the question to Jordans. And so I said, if you go to the store, you get 2 Jordans for $360. What's the cost of 1 Jordan? He said it's $180. And then I said, I asked you the same thing. For me that was like a eureka moment, because it made me understand that teaching becomes very effective when it incorporates like people's lived context. So moving back to the internship, myself and the other interns were doing a lot of, research, brainstorming solutions, and then designing mock-ups for the solutions that we found at the time. However, we were very, very close to the end of the internship. I realized, or that story pretty much came back to me, where it was, that it sort of occurred to me that we hadn't really designed solutions around students' pain points. We hadn't really understood their pain points to design the solution. We sort of like went ahead to sort of like design a couple of solutions. And so as a result, I, just pivoted my strategy, went to develop like a strategy instead to collect students' insights and then incorporate data-driven approaches to, addressing their challenges. And I think for me, that was key and sort of like kicked off my interest in the whole learning engineering field. So yeah, that's something that, sort of happened at that point. I wasn't able to, finish it because I was always almost close to the internship, but at the same time, I was able to, develop that strategy, and then it built my interest in the field of.
I think the best thing to do is not to share the story, because there are really many of them, honestly, from the lack of preparation for the training to the budget problem. The best thing is to realize your position on mistakes. For example, something happened. Estimate the level of loss, identify what or where can or cannot you control, make conclusion and move on, just move on.
Yeah, like when I started in 2018, there was like the situation or the playground that I got was quite challenging. I had to build up things from start, and there was a lot more to cover, scale up the engineering resources, formation of all the processes and all that. So the mistake that I did in the very start was I directly jumped on towards execution part, like executing the trainings, drafting the content, and then just rushing on towards execution part, having sessions every other day and all that. But after like a couple of days, or I guess a week or so, I realized that this is not something that should be the starting point. So I jumped back. I realized that there should be a proper planning for that. And from then I started working on the skill metrics. Skill metrics being a map of the skill set that everyone needs to mark their skill set before having all those trainings. And then we kept on planning all those trainings in context to that skill matrices. And then the planning and all those activities being done iteratively in aligning with the organizational values. So that actually turned off things very nicely. So we had the previous results, then we were on towards execution, then we had the post-analysis based upon the realistic data. So after that realization and stepping back and then planning all those processes, so that actually helped me a lot. And that's what I've been using whenever I have to do the scratch start of L&D or any learning and development programs anywhere. So that was a good learning lesson for me as well.
So failures are always difficult to talk about. The first thing that comes to mind is actually, it takes me back several years to the very first course that I ever designed and was about to deliver. And it almost didn't happen. The reason I say that is I didn't even consider myself as an L&D person at that time. I was a marketer who was passionate about learning. So I had designed a course. I still remember it was called Future Ready Marketing. And I was going to deliver it in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And I almost didn't do it simply because the organizer called me a week before saying that we don't have the exact number of participants that he had promised. They were expecting around 25 participants. And he said, look, I've only had 14 registrations. I'm okay to go along if you are too. And maybe I was a bit too snobbish and arrogant at the time. And I said, hey, I'm not flying all the way to Kuala Lumpur just for 14 participants. So I actually said no. And had I stopped there, I would have never even started on my L&D journey, what eventually became my L&D journey. And my father, bless him, I happen to call him every day. He lives in Pakistan. And he asked me, hey, how's that course going? And I said, it's not happening anymore. And he said, don't be a fool. Why does it matter whether it's 14 people or 24 people? Make sure you go. Now, I didn't really like his advice at the time, but I always respectfully took his advice. And I'm so glad today, it's almost 9 years since, that I said yes. I called back the organizer and I said, look, if it's still okay, it's fine. Let's just go ahead. As it happened, a week later, by the time I landed in Kuala Lumpur, they got 17 participants, so a little bit more than 14. But the amazing thing is I got all the learnings that I needed in that session from those 17 people. So the big learning was, don't worry about numbers, but just get started. Because had I just stopped the journey there, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have tried again, thinking that, my courses are not even attracting enough people to run my first course. But that was just the beginning of a very long journey. And I'm very glad that I took my father's advice and I didn't look at the numbers, and I just went ahead and did the course. And I got great feedback, which was obviously very encouraging, and some areas that needed to be improved.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that it's kind of a setback that I had is I had been working with product design, digital user experience for quite a long time. And I suddenly found myself, like about 8 years ago, I realized that I got to a point where I was really terrified of public speaking. But I needed to be running meetings, but I was really not, it really wasn't working for me at all. And so I literally just went out, and there was a friend of mine was organizing a TEDx conference, and I just went to them and said, look, I didn't want to give a talk, but I basically said, I would like to host this event for you. And I just went out there, and I was terrified, and every part of me was shaking, but I just did it. And then I sort of did that on repeat, and I had a couple of local events where I was able to do this hosting and moderation. And I just pulled myself through it, I just made myself do it. And this is now I'm pretty happy. I can get up on stage, I can facilitate groups. And it just really took that practice, getting it, embodying it was the way to get me through. So yeah, that's mine.